Well, welcome, Joe Masters, economist extraordinaire for EY, from a distinguished career in banking and now in the advisory world. Joe, you've been in quite demand in national media in recent days talking about the economic fallout from a health crisis. Do you sit this stage of the process a little more confident than you might have been a couple of weeks ago, or is your curve of confidence going the other way?
I think I'm less fearful than I was a couple of weeks ago. Now, that doesn't translate one for one into being more confident, but it's moved forward from the period where it just seemed like relentlessly bad news, and I was becoming increasingly concerned. Look, it's never been a better time to be an economist. Everyone's thinking about the health crisis, about the economy. So, lots of interest in the sorts of things that I follow all of the time. But in short, feeling less fearful.
Chief medical officers and chief economists are all the rage. They're the new Kardashians of the global news scene. Joe, does that increased confidence come as a direct result of political reaction, or just good luck, good management? Where do you plot our recovery at this early stage?
Sure. So, look, as always, it comes from a couple of things. Clearly, the infection rate data that we're seeing here in Australia is looking better than in many other economies, and arguably better than we thought. So the social distancing that we've put in place, doing its job, having an impact. I'm not a health expert, so that data just sort of comes to me. But we know that the sooner that we get the virus under control, for want of a better word, the sooner we can think about reawakening our economy. So that's a big part behind being less fearful. The other piece is absolutely the policy response that we've had. Enormous amount of very coordinated policy action. And that's a lesson from previous crises, right? Is pull every lever you have, pull it hard, pull it early, and pull it in a really coordinated fashion. So obviously, some really big fiscal stimulus measures, JobKeeper, $130 billion put together really, really quickly. It's a broad package. It's a good package. There's obviously direct fiscal spend into parts of our economy, but also working with the Reserve Bank around getting liquidity through the system, ensuring that credit continues to grow. We know how to do that from the GFC, so that's been done really well. And then also a whole raft of other measures around for example, some of the changes around bankruptcy and directors. So, really big package. It's unprecedented times. I don't know if it's enough, but it has certainly made people feel, not just me, but I think people more broadly, less fearful.
It does seem we learnt more from GFC than we learnt from SARS, the Asian experience with SARS and MERS. We've got better at a financial recovery than we've been probably in the early stages of managing a health pandemic, but it's all...
absolutely. Yeah.
We get that.
Now,
Now,
I think
EY...
from the GFC was the need for that coordinated attack sort of plan, not just across our levels of government, but central banks globally coordinating to ensure, swap lines are open and just keep that financial system running.
Did you think you'd see a day where a Liberal Treasurer just has gone very long on welfare? And on the flip side, do you think, and there's evidence to show you can wean people off welfare, considering the sustaining payments that are going to have to see us through the next few months?
Yeah, look, great question. In fact, just earlier today, I was having a look at our experience during the early 1990 recession. Very different, but also actually quite severe. And the unemployment rate shot up from about 6% to a peak of just over 11%. And we got it back down to about 8% quite quickly, but it sat there for sort of almost 3 years before it then gradually got back down to the low 5s that we've seen recently. So there is that concern that when people lose their job, you get that structural unemployment. They don't easily get back into the workforce when the economy recovers. So that will be a problem, because we know that we have shut down parts of our economy. We know that there are businesses that won't be able to survive that, despite the amount of support that we're trying to give the economic fabric that we need. In terms of how big that is, so I think the JobKeeper subsidy is game-changing, right? Because it tries to keep people connected to their employer. Technically, they will be counted as employed, even if they've got 0 hours worked. So that's something to bear in mind with those job starter. But the hope
is... That's interesting. So when governments are saying jobless rates to 15%, they're obviously not including the people who are getting JobKeeper but are effectively not going to work at all.
So prior to the JobKeeper announcement, we thought that the peak in the unemployment rate would be between about 15 and 20%. With the JobKeeper subsidy, it looks like it'll be more like 10%. Now, mainly because we count them as employed. And they are employed, I guess they are on the payroll. And it is providing Australians with confidence that there is a job at the end of this. Even if that job may look a little bit different, there is a job and that you're not going to have to go out there and hunt and compete for a job. So that program will help and will reduce the number of people that need to get, as you said, sort of weaned off social welfare.
Before we have a regional look, let's have a global look. Do you imagine the world comes out of this all holding hands in lockstep for a one global recovery? Or do we shift effectively the tectonic geopolitical financial plates as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think the world shifts. I don't think everyone recovers at the same time. There's
China in first, China out first?
Well, that's what we're seeing. The data out of China is showing that, 11 weeks since social distancing in Wuhan, they're starting to open that up. We can look at data like coal usage, for example, electricity usage, traffic congestion on the road. A lot of those data points are sort of almost back to where they were pre-crisis. We're hearing anecdotes from Australian companies that they are starting to get those shipments in of the components that they need. So it does look like that. And it will also depend on, there's been different approaches to this crisis. So we tend to focus on advanced economies that have had a similar approach to us. So social distancing, big fiscal support. But a lot of developing economies don't have that privilege, right? So they've taken a very different path. I think the other thing that will change sort of the world structure, if you like, is around supply chains. So this has really highlighted that you need some diversity in your supply chain. And the second part of that question is, should we be onshoring some of the manufacturing of goods that we think are critical to our well-being and economic prosperity?
Perfect segue for me to my beloved region of Western Sydney, the traditional home of manufacturing, but more about the old fabrication and assembly line stuff of yesteryear. And you're right, a move towards advanced manufacturing and developing things here. EY heavily committed to this region, due to open its Parramatta office, was due to open in a couple of months' time, whether the timeline's now. But one of the issues Western Sydney's looking at strongly is that infrastructure pipeline to be that steel spine that's building a region. Do you have a confidence that despite the big hit on public finance for the welfare maintenance issues, there's going to be money left in the kitty or an appetite more for government to borrow to keep those big projects, infrastructure projects like the metro rail lines and Stadia and others going?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So the stimulus that we've seen in recent weeks is all about this hibernation period, which is a term we seem to have coined in the last few weeks, actually. I'd never really heard it before, but it is exactly what we're doing. We're hibernating our economy. So the fiscal stimulus is about trying to reduce fixed costs for businesses, for example, support income for Australians. But once the health crisis stabilises and we start to open up our economy, we're still going to need to support what economists call aggregate demand, which is consumption and investment. And infrastructure spend is a really positive way of doing that because you're building productive assets, you're making your cities more efficient. All those things are still really important and maybe even more important in a world where you've just actually lost a whole heap of economic activity. So I don't think infrastructure is part of the help the hibernation phase. So it's not the phase one, but it is the phase two as we come out of this recovery. In terms of funding it, look, we're going to have a lot more debt than we would have had otherwise. But the policies we put in place, we've had to put in place. So it's been money appropriately spent. It will take decades to pay off.
Debt's become a political football in recent years. Is debt essentially bad at a national and state government level? Is it getting a bad name politically as opposed to economically?
Sure. So I guess economists talk about good debt and bad debt. Not all debt is created equal. So, you would argue that debt that is where the money is used to make your economy more efficient or more productive.
So building the train lines, building the hardware and infrastructure.
Faster, absolutely. Those are things that boost growth in the future. So that is sort of good debt, if you like. Bad debt is when you raise money to pay for the day-to-day running of government or on assets that you just don't need. So I think there is sort of that focus. The other thing that's really important to remember is, I know we in Australia have been talking about the need to repay our debt, our government debt, but our government debt is actually really low compared to most global economies. So we expect, even after the announcements that we've seen in recent weeks, that government debt will get to something like 40 to 50% of GDP. To put that in context, the US and the UK have over 100% government debt to GDP, and Japan is over 200. We are a AAA rated economy. 11 economies are AAA rated in the world. So we do have scope to use debt to support our recovery.
So we've also seen a lot of personal transformation through this processes. So in recoveries, we're talking about how a nation can reform, how we ourselves are going to approach things differently. Two-pronged question to you. Coming out of this, how does Joe Masters operate differently in a post-COVID world? Does it have a dramatic impact on your social professional outlook? And maybe an idea, give you a couple of seconds to think about, an idea of a major reform that the community might accept now that might have been difficult to put through. Let no crisis go unleveraged. What maybe economically could we do that governments wouldn't have, or business wouldn't have got away with a while ago?
Great question. So, look, for me personally, the most obvious one is I typically am on 2 to 4 planes a week. And I think that's going to change because I haven't been on one.
Yeah.
I think since early March. And, suddenly we're Zooming, we're webinaring, we're Microsoft Teaming. So I suspect a lot of the travel that I did before, I don't think it will be no travel, but I think it'll be a lot less travel than it's been before. And it's actually been really nice to be at home. So I really enjoyed my home actually over the last few weeks. I've been pretty busy at work though, so I haven't had too much chance to get bored. Maybe that'll come.
They're tough taskmasters at EY.
Well, look, everyone wants the economist, right? Yeah. So in a sense, it's
your time to shine.
It's my time, and it's my time to actually to try to teach people that staying on top of economics is really important. And you've heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again. No matter what industry you work in, where you live, how old you are, any of those factors, the reality is what goes right in your business and maybe what goes wrong almost always starts at the macro level. So I really encourage people to try and keep their finger on the pulse of the economy. And it's one of the things that I do for EY is try to help our people and our clients and the community that we work in do that. With the second question, look, great question. I do agree. You do tend to often get an opportunity for reform. One that's perhaps a little bit controversial is, from my perspective, is around tax reform. It's just been really difficult in our economy to put through tax reform for lots of reasons. But I feel like this could be an opportunity. And one of the things that economists often argue, of course, is that we have an over-reliance on corporate and income tax. And we have a very low GST that also doesn't have very wide coverage. So in a world where we're going to have a lot of debt, and I would argue at some point, not now, but at some point we need to start to pay that back, because debt basically borrows growth from the future. And as a mother of 2 children, I want them to have economic opportunity. Taxation reform is going to be a big part of that, right? Driving revenue. So do we have an opportunity to have a open, frank, and very broad discussion around the most efficient taxes to have in our economy?
Agree. Hey, good luck with the homeschooling. Good luck with the battle over Netflix, everything else we're going through. And from one failed economist to a celebrity economist, Joe Masters and EY, thanks for your time. Stay safe.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.